She placed her 4 hands on the ancient beacon and spoke into the void in 17 languages. "We are not warriors. We have never learned to hate or to kill. Our weapons are songs and our shields are harmony." Against the approaching darkness, Valara knew these things were not enough. Her people were facing extinction, and their only hope was a desperate cry across the stars. But who would answer a plea from a civilization that had never known war? The Cathar civilization floated above the swirling atmosphere of gas giants. Their crystal platforms rode the clouds, suspended through harmonic resonance technology their ancestors had perfected. During festivals, entire cities pulsed with emotional light that shifted from warm gold to contemplative indigo, a visible representation of their collective mood. This light was not artificial illumination, but a biological byproduct of their social harmony. This society moved to one rhythm. Every Cathar contributed to the communal resonance, a living network of song that served as communication, art, and defense. Musical frequencies stabilized their floating architecture and powered their few systems. For 3,000 standard years, no Cathar hand had ever fashioned a blade or a gun. Their history recorded no wars, no internal conflicts that required violent solutions. They resolved disputes through harmonic realignment and empathetic connection, considering warfare a primitive solution to misunderstandings. The first warnings came as simple silences. Trading partners on the edge of known space stopped answering hails. Long-range sensors detected massive energy surges where peaceful colonies had thrived. Then the refugee ships arrived, battered vessels crammed with beings from a dozen different species. Their stories made no sense to the Cathar. They spoke of an enemy that did not conquer or negotiate, only consumed. They described entire worlds stripped to bedrock, populations vanishing without trace, fleets dismantled and absorbed. When the attackers finally reached their system, the Cathar saw the horror for themselves. Swarms of insect-like craft moved with perfect synchronization, landing on the outermost crystal platforms. They didn't blast through defenses but ate through them, dissolving the very structures with acidic secretions. The Cathar raised their harmonic shields, projecting walls of disruptive sound that had deterred meteor showers and solar flares for centuries. The enemy adapted within hours, shifting their biological frequencies to match and neutralize the defense. Their song-based weapons, designed to calm and pacify, had no effect on beings with no emotion to manipulate. Valara watched from the central coordination platform as the outer colonies went dark. The emotional light of distant cities flickered and died as the harmony web frayed under the assault. She saw platforms break apart, their crystalline structures dissolving into the gas giant below. Their entire philosophy of peace felt like a fragile illusion against such methodical consumption. The enemy didn't hate them, didn't want their territory or resources in any conventional sense. They simply processed everything into raw biomass, a force of nature with terrifying intelligence. As High Coordinator, Valara faced impossible calculations. Evacuation required moving millions of beings across dangerous space with limited ships. Staying meant watching her civilization be digested platform by platform. Their faith in universal harmony had left them utterly unprepared for pure, mindless consumption. She accessed the ancient beacon, a relic from first contact with other species. It was their only remaining option, a desperate message to civilizations they barely understood, hoping someone would answer a plea from a people who had never learned to fight. The enemy that pushed the Cathar to the edge had no name they could pronounce. Refugee accounts called them the Scar Dominion, a label that stuck across star systems. They moved as a single consciousness distributed across millions of biological units, a perfect collective without individual thought or hesitation. This wasn't an empire or a civilization in any recognizable sense. They were more like a neural network with physical bodies, a hive mind that processed the galaxy as data to be consumed. Their ships resembled enormous insects carved from dark metallic bone. They didn't maneuver like conventional vessels but swarmed like locusts, landing on the crystal platforms without attempting communication or negotiation. Their method of attack was systematic consumption. Specialized organisms excreted powerful enzymes that dissolved the platform's crystalline structures, breaking them down into basic chemical components that were then absorbed. They processed cities, atmosphere, and living beings with equal efficiency, converting everything into biological raw material for their expansion. This wasn't conquest for territory or resources in any political sense. The Scar operated on a scale beyond conventional warfare, treating entire worlds as harvestable biomass. They strip-mined civilizations, leaving behind only sterile rock and void where thriving ecosystems had existed. Galactic survey teams later described the aftermath as scouring. No artifacts, no ruins. Just planetary surfaces reduced to geometric patterns where processing had occurred. The Scar's greatest advantage was their instantaneous adaptation. Their collective consciousness analyzed every defensive measure encountered and distributed countermeasures across their entire fleet within hours. When the Cathar modulated their harmonic shields to specific frequencies, the Scar developed resonant dampeners. When they tried crystalline projectiles, the enemy secreted impact-absorbing gels. Each attempt at defense only made the Scar more efficient at dismantling their civilization. Witnesses from fallen worlds described the Scar as a cellular process operating on a galactic scale. They moved through star systems like an immune response, identifying organized biological structures and breaking them down into component parts. Their largest vessel observed was approximately lunar mass, a mobile processing center that traveled with the swarm fleets. This central hive served as the physical anchor for their consciousness, coordinating the consumption of entire planetary systems. Against this opponent, the Cathar's entire cultural foundation became a liability. Their harmonic weapons designed to calm aggressive species had no effect on a consciousness that felt no emotion. Their defensive strategies based on creating balance and harmony were useless against a force that sought only dismantlement. Their social structure built on empathy and connection couldn't comprehend an enemy that recognized no other beings as having intrinsic value. Valara understood the horrific truth as she watched platform after platform fall. They weren't fighting an invasion force with objectives or demands. They were facing a natural phenomenon with intelligence, a predator that had evolved beyond conventional biological limits. The Scar didn't hate them, didn't want their territory or resources. They simply processed organized matter into usable components. Their beautiful civilization was just another energy source to be metabolized. This realization changed everything about their resistance. Traditional military strategies would fail against an enemy that learned from every encounter. Evacuation plans were useless against a force that consumed everything in its path. Their only hope lay in finding something the Scar couldn't predict or process, something from outside their evolutionary experience. Something that didn't follow the logical patterns of consumption and defense that dominated this part of the galaxy. Valara walked through the silent corridors of the central coordination platform. The walls around her pulsed with a faint amber glow, the color of collective anxiety. She reached the communications chamber where the ancient beacon stood. It was older than recorded Cathar history, a relic from the age when their species first reached beyond their atmosphere. Carved from a single piece of quantum crystal, it hummed with dormant power, waiting for a signal worth its immense energy cost. She extended her 4 hands and placed them on the smooth surface. The crystal warmed to her touch, responding to her biosignature. Patterns of light swirled beneath her palms as the system activated. This device could project a message across thousands of light years, farther than any conventional transmitter. The Cathar had used it only 3 times in their history, always for first contact, never for desperation. Her message began with a confession of failure. She spoke first in the common trade language of the nearby systems, then repeated the essence in 16 other tongues. Each language represented a civilization that might intercept the signal, however unlikely. She structured the message with careful layers, knowing it might be their last transmission. "We are not warriors," she stated, the words feeling foreign yet true. She explained how her people had never developed weapons beyond sonic projectors that could calm aggressive wildlife. Their defensive systems used harmonic resonance to create shields of coordinated sound waves. These worked against natural threats but shattered against deliberate malice. Against the Scar, their entire technological foundation had proven useless. She described the falling platforms, the silent cities, the millions of citizens processed into biomass. She detailed how the enemy adapted to every defense within hours, learning and evolving from each encounter. Her voice remained steady despite the horror she recounted. This was not a strategic assessment but a testimony, a record of a civilization's end. The final part of the message contained no tactical data or strategic analysis. Instead, she made a simple appeal to any who might hear it. She spoke of crystal cities that sang at dawn, of harmonies that could heal emotional wounds, of a culture that had never known violence until now. She asked whether such beauty had value in a merciless universe, whether any species would risk themselves for strangers who could offer nothing in return but gratitude. Her closing words were stark and direct. If you believe peace is worth defending, if you think beauty should not be consumed, help us. She gave their coordinates and the approximate time until total collapse. Then she removed her hands from the crystal. The beacon flared with impossible energy, focusing the message into a tight beam that pierced the void. It would travel for weeks before reaching the nearest occupied systems, a lonely cry against the darkness. The transmission drained their power reserve significantly, but that hardly mattered now. Either someone would answer, or they would join the silent worlds the scar had already consumed. Valara watched the status indicators confirm the message had been sent. The consoles showed the scar vessels moving closer, their patterns relentless and inevitable. She didn't know if her plea would reach anyone in time or whether anyone would care, but she had given her people the only chance. They had left, a chance that depended entirely on the compassion of strangers. Captain Jake Morrison monitored the deep space. Traffic reports from the bridge of the UES Defiance. The ship floated in a quiet sector, running routine patrols along the edge of human-explored territory. Sensor displays showed the usual background radiation and subspace echoes. Then the alert console lit up with 17 simultaneous priority signals. Each frequency carried identical content, broadcast with power levels that spiked well beyond normal communication protocols. Linguist Lisa Park transferred the signals to her analysis station. Her software began parsing the multiple languages, building translation matrices in real time. The message structure was unusual, not the standardized distress format used by most spacefaring species. It began with what sounded like a cultural primer, then shifted to a tactical situation report. The translation algorithm struggled with concepts that had no equivalence in human experience. References to harmonic defense systems and emotional light networks required complete recalibration of the linguistic database. Morrison listened to the cleaned-up audio feed. The voice spoke with a calm precision that felt alien in an emergency broadcast. It described a civilization that had never developed weapons, whose entire defensive capability relied on sonic harmony and resonant frequencies. The speaker detailed how their platforms were being consumed rather than conquered, how their peaceful history had left them helpless against a consuming swarm. This wasn't a military distress call asking for reinforcements. It was a confession of absolute vulnerability. The tactical display updated with the signal's origin point. The coordinates placed it deep in uncharted space far beyond normal patrol routes. The estimated travel time showed weeks even at maximum jump capacity. The sector designation matched areas where previous reconnaissance missions had reported unexplained silences and missing colonies. Sensor logs from that region showed massive energy signatures consistent with planetary-scale consumption events. Morrison's training told him to treat unidentified signals as potential threats. Standard protocol required immediate encryption and relay to command for analysis. The message's raw honesty felt like either profound truth or sophisticated deception. A military commander would never reveal such complete vulnerability to unknown recipients. The strategic disadvantage of admitting total defensive failure went against every tactical doctrine. He studied the linguistic analysis. The message contained no hidden codes or subliminal patterns. The emotional resonance scanner showed only genuine desperation, without aggression or deception markers. The multiple language broadcasts suggested either extreme urgency or complete ignorance of standard communication protocols. The description of their technology matched no known species capabilities in human databases. The tactical assessment showed the extreme risk of any response mission. The distance alone would strain ship resources. The described enemy capabilities suggested overwhelming force against any conventional fleet. Standard procedure dictated observation and intelligence gathering before engagement. Military logic said to monitor and report, not charge into an unknown conflict against an unstoppable enemy. Morrison kept listening to the translated message. The speaker's voice remained steady while describing the consumption of her cities. She didn't ask for weapons or soldiers. She asked if anyone believed peace was worth defending. The question echoed in the quiet bridge. contrasting with the military efficiency surrounding him. His instinct recognized something beyond a tactical situation. This was a fundamental test of values. He felt the conflict between protocol and responsibility. His duty was to protect human interests and follow established procedures. His experience told him this wasn't a trap. The strategic disadvantage of broadcasting such vulnerability was too great. The message felt like a genuine cry from beings facing absolute extinction. The decision weighed heavier than any combat engagement. He ordered the complete recording prepared for transmission to Earth Command. Knowing it would trigger debates that could determine the fate of an entire civilization, Captain Morrison compiled his report with methodical precision. He documented the signal's technical parameters, the translation analysis, and the tactical assessment of the source location. His recommendation emphasized extreme caution and continued observation. He detailed the risks of engagement without proper intelligence and the strategic implications of diverting resources to an unknown conflict. The document reflected standard military procedure: assess, observe, report, and await orders. He understood the political climate back on Earth. The Council preferred isolationist policies, avoiding entanglements with unknown species. Previous first contact incidents had resulted in costly misunderstandings and resource drains. The current administration advocated for focusing on human colony development rather than galactic policing. Morrison knew his report would reinforce their preferred stance of non-intervention. The strategic reality was brutally clear. The signal originated from a system already experiencing catastrophic attacks. Long-range scans showed massive energy discharges consistent with planetary-scale consumption events. Any relief force would arrive to find a war already lost. The travel time alone meant weeks of transit through uncharted space with unknown hazards. Sending a fleet meant risking ships and crews for complete strangers. They had no treaties with the Cathar, no diplomatic relations, no mutual defense agreements. The species described themselves as pacifists who couldn't defend themselves, offering no strategic value in return for protection. Military logic dictated preserving forces for known threats to human interests. The described enemy capabilities presented overwhelming odds. The SCAR operated with hundreds of vessels according to the transmission. Human forces in that sector consisted of 37 ships total, most designed for patrol rather than full combat. Intelligence assessments showed the enemy adapted to defenses within hours, making conventional tactics useless. The technological disadvantage appeared insurmountable. Morrison argued the only prudent course was continued monitoring. He recommended deploying additional reconnaissance drones to gather intelligence without risking personnel. He suggested alerting nearby human colonies to prepare defensive measures. His analysis concluded that direct engagement would be tactical suicide with no measurable strategic benefit. He felt the weight of command responsibility. His primary duty was to protect his crew from unnecessary danger. Leading them into an unwinnable battle against an unknown enemy violated every principle of military leadership. The faces of his officers and crew members passed through his mind, people with families and futures that didn't include dying for strangers in deep space. Yet Valara's voice lingered in his thoughts. The calm precision of her description of annihilation haunted him. He kept remembering her statement about weapons made of song and shields made of harmony. The image of a civilization that sang as their world was consumed around them felt fundamentally wrong. It contradicted every human instinct about survival and community. His training said to follow procedure and protect his people. His experience said this situation required caution and distance. But something deeper than training or experience stirred at the edges of his consciousness. The human species had its own history of helping strangers during disasters, of responding to cries for help regardless of cost or calculation. He signed the report and encrypted it for transmission to Earth Command. The document recommended non-intervention and continued observation. It was the correct military decision, the logical strategic choice, the responsible command recommendation. Yet as he sent it, he felt a disconnect between the words on the screen and the unease in his gut. The refusal felt right in his head but wrong in his bones. He turned back to the tactical display, watching the distant sector, where a peaceful species was being systematically consumed, and wondered if logic was always the best guide when facing extinction. The emergency council chamber fell silent as Valara's transmission played through the audio system. Diplomats from 12 nations, military leaders from 5 branches, and scientists from 3 disciplines sat motionless. The multi-language message echoed through the sound-engineered room, each translation carrying the same desperate weight. Council members who had argued over border disputes and resource allocations now listened to a voice describing the consumption of an entire civilization. Dr. Helen Carter from Xenobiology stood at the analysis podium. Her team had spent 72 hours dissecting every aspect of the transmission. She presented frequency analysis showing no deception patterns in the vocal modulations. The cultural references to harmonic technology and emotional light networks displayed internal consistency across all 17 language versions. The technological descriptions matched no known warfare capabilities in the galactic database. Her conclusion was definitive. This was not a trap or strategic deception. She explained how the message's structure revealed a society without military concepts. The descriptions of defensive systems focused on resonance and harmony, rather than projectile velocity or shield strength. The terminology for conflict resolution involved musical terminology, rather than tactical terminology. Even their description of the enemy focused on consumption patterns rather than military formations. Every linguistic marker pointed toward a genuinely pacifist culture, facing absolute annihilation. Commander Alex Reed from Tactical Planning took the podium next. His presentation showed strategic overlays of the described conflict zone. Long-range sensor data correlated with the transmission's timeline of attacks. Energy signatures matched patterns of large-scale biological processing. The estimated fleet size of the SCAR forces indicated overwhelming force against any conventional defense. His map showed the progression of consumed systems moving steadily toward human-explored space. He detailed the nightmare scenario. If the transmission was accurate, they faced an enemy that treated civilizations as raw material. The adaptation rate described suggested technological capabilities beyond any known species. The consumption pattern showed no political or strategic objectives, only expansion and resource acquisition. This wasn't an invasion force to be negotiated with, but a biological process to be stopped. Left unchecked, it would eventually reach human colonies. The debate began with isolationist arguments. Several council members advocated for increased border security and observation only. They cited the immense cost of mounting an expeditionary force. They pointed to historical interventions that had drained resources without clear benefits. The strategic uncertainty of engaging an unknown enemy in distant space gave them pause. Their position was clear: protect human interests first, avoid unnecessary conflicts. Other council members argued from moral principle. They stated that allowing a peaceful civilization to be consumed represented a failure of basic ethics. They referenced historical moments when humanity had chosen intervention over isolation. They questioned what value peace had if they wouldn't defend it when threatened. The description of weapons made of song and shields made of harmony resonated with their concept of civilization worth preserving. The discussion narrowed to a single critical question. Was this transmission genuine vulnerability or sophisticated deception? The intelligence analysis showed no evidence of falsehood. The technological descriptions were too consistent. The cultural references too deeply embedded. The enemy description matched sensor data from silent sectors. The risk of deception seemed lower than the risk of ignoring a genuine extinction event. A consensus formed around a surprising conclusion. The transmission was real, the threat was existential, and inaction was strategically and morally unacceptable. They weren't just considering saving another species. They were confronting a universal threat that would eventually reach humanity. The question shifted from whether to respond to how to respond effectively. The Council moved toward authorization of an expeditionary force, knowing the decision would cost lives but might save a civilization. The Council chamber lights dimmed as the final vote concluded. The decision marked a historic departure from established protocol. For the first time, Earth would answer a distress call from an unknown species facing imminent extinction. The motion passed with near-unanimous support, bridging political divisions that had stalled lesser initiatives for years. Strategic assessment merged with ethical imperative in the Council's rationale. Intelligence analysis confirmed the Scar Dominion represented a universal threat that would eventually reach human space if left unchecked. Allowing a civilization to be consumed set a dangerous precedent for galactic security. The moral argument carried equal weight. Abandoning a peaceful people to annihilation violated fundamental human principles. The Council recognized that some threats required preemptive response rather than reactive defense. This intervention offered strategic benefits beyond immediate crisis response. Establishing relations with the Cathar could create a valuable alliance with a technologically unique species. Their harmonic technology and cultural knowledge represented unexplored scientific frontiers. Rescuing them would demonstrate humanity's commitment to galactic stability, potentially attracting other species to cooperative agreements. The diplomatic upside justified the considerable risk. The operation order authorized a 37-ship expeditionary force drawn from nearby patrol groups. Command fell to Captain Morrison despite his initial reservations. His experience with deep space operations and first contact protocols made him the logical choice. The fleet composition emphasized reconnaissance and rapid response capabilities over heavy combat units. Each ship received emergency medical facilities and refugee transport modifications. The mission parameters focused on rescue and intelligence gathering, rather than direct engagement. Primary objectives involved evacuating Cathar citizens and documenting SCAR tactics for future defense planning. Secondary goals included establishing communication protocols with the Cathar and assessing their technological capabilities. The orders explicitly caution against unnecessary engagements with superior enemy forces. The tactical briefing acknowledged the overwhelming numerical disadvantage. Intelligence estimated over 300 SCAR vessels in the conflict zone against 37 human ships. The adaptation capabilities described suggested conventional combat would prove ineffective. Planners emphasized avoidance and evacuation over direct confrontation, prioritizing civilian rescue above military victory. The underlying rationale transcended strategic calculation. Dr. Carter's psychological assessment noted that helping strangers in extreme danger reflected a core human trait dating back to terrestrial disaster response. Historical records showed humans consistently risked themselves for others regardless of species or origin. This impulse had shaped human expansion and diplomacy since first achieving spaceflight capability. The Council accepted the inevitable human cost of the mission. Projections indicated significant casualties based on the described enemy capabilities and transport distance. Families of deployed personnel received updated contingency notifications and support arrangements. The decision to risk lives for unknown beings required justifying the sacrifice as necessary for greater galactic stability. The expedition represented a fundamental expression of human nature confronting an alien threat. Where the Cathar offered songs and harmony, humanity brought reinforced hulls and projectile weapons. The contrast between pacifist pleas and military response highlighted the difference in evolutionary paths. This was a Deathworlders' answer to a civilization that had never known violence, protection through calculated application of force. The fleet began immediate preparations for jump sequence. Supply ships transferred additional munitions and medical resources. Crews received briefings on Cathar physiology and cultural protocols. The ship's departure marked a turning point in human galactic policy, shifting from isolated observation to active intervention. They embarked knowing they might be traveling toward their own destruction, but compelled by the simple conviction that sometimes helping is reason enough. Captain Morrison received the transmission from Earth Command with a heavy awareness of its implications. The orders contained exactly what he had initially recommended against: a full expeditionary mission into hostile, uncharted space. He felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, a familiar pressure that now carried unprecedented consequences. His initial refusal had been based on tactical logic and standard protocol, but the Council's decision introduced a broader perspective he hadn't considered. This wasn't just about military advantage or strategic positioning. It was about answering a cry for help from beings facing absolute annihilation, something that resonated with fundamental human values beyond tactical calculation. He called his senior officers to the briefing room and laid out the mission parameters. He framed the operation not as a combat deployment, but as a large-scale rescue mission. Their primary objective involved extracting as many Cathar civilians as possible while gathering intelligence on the enemy. He emphasized that they weren't invading or conquering, but providing emergency assistance to a civilization in its final moments. This reframing helped his crew understand the unusual nature of their orders. Morrison used a phrase that would become their unofficial motto. They would need to be stupid and brave. The description captured the necessary recklessness of their mission. Conventional military wisdom said to avoid engagements against overwhelming forces. They were choosing to enter exactly such a situation because it was the right thing to do. This apparent contradiction between tactical sense and moral imperative defined their new reality. He explained how their human nature might become their greatest weapon against the enemy. Intelligence suggested the Scar operated as a collective consciousness that predicted and counteracted logical strategies. Human creativity and unpredictability could disrupt patterns that a purely logical enemy expected. Their ability to make illogical decisions, to take unexpected risks, might create openings that conventional tactics couldn't achieve. The cultural preparation began immediately. Crew members received briefings on Cathar physiology and social structures. They learned about harmonic technology and emotional light networks. The concept of warriors who had never trained for combat presented unique challenges for integration. Morrison had to develop protocols for military personnel to cooperate with beings who viewed conflict as a foreign concept. He became the bridge between two fundamentally different approaches to danger. He translated human combat terminology into concepts of protection and defense that the Cathar could understand. He developed communication protocols that emphasized rescue and preservation rather than attack and destruction. This required rethinking standard operating procedures and developing entirely new engagement rules. His personal conflict evolved from resistance to determined focus. Where he had initially seen only risk and strategic disadvantage, he now saw lives that could be saved. Each ship in their fleet represented potential rescue for thousands of Cathar citizens. The mathematical certainty of casualties shifted from abstract loss to calculated sacrifice for measurable gain. This perspective changed how he viewed their mission parameters and risk assessments. The fleet assembled at the jump point coordinates, 37 ships against an enemy numbering in the hundreds. Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiance watching the status reports come in. Each ship confirmed readiness for transit into unknown space. The journey would take weeks of travel through regions with limited reconnaissance data. They would arrive into an active conflict zone with no guarantee of safe extraction. He gave the order to initiate the jump sequence. The ships activated their drives in coordinated sequence, creating a synchronized energy signature across the formation. The void before them distorted as space-time folded around their vessels. They entered the jump point knowing they were heading toward almost certain combat against an enemy, unlike any they had faced. Their preparation had been rushed, their intelligence limited, their odds terrible. But they went because sometimes helping requires being both stupid and brave enough to try. The human fleet dropped out of jump space into a system of surreal beauty and devastation. Before them floated the Cathar homeworld, a gas giant orbited by crystal platforms that glowed with fading emotional light. Some shone in brilliant defiance, while others pulsed the deep indigo of mourning. The harmonic songs that usually filled the space now sounded like funeral dirges, their rhythms broken by static and interference. Scars of consumption marred several platforms where the enemy had already begun their work. Cathar vessels approached the human fleet with graceful, sweeping motions that contrasted sharply with the angular military formation. Their ships resembled crystalline sculptures more than combat craft, moving through space with a dancer's precision. The beings who emerged wore expressions of awe and fear in equal measure. Their four hands moved in subtle patterns that human translators interpreted as both welcome and warning gestures. They saw the human marines in powered armor as terrifying creatures of pure violence, their every movement radiating lethal efficiency. Human crews looked back with equal astonishment. They saw a civilization that had built floating cities of light and sound, but possessed no weapons to defend them. The Cathar's physical grace and emotional transparency appeared tragically vulnerable against the brutality they faced. Their defensive preparations involved harmonic alignment and group meditation, rather than fortifications and weapons training. This cultural difference created an immediate barrier to coordination. Valara met Morrison on a neutral docking platform between their ships. The coordinator moved with the flowing grace of her people, her four hands expressing complex emotions that human body language couldn't match. Morrison stood with the solid stance of a military commander, his movements economical and direct. They struggled to find common ground beyond basic survival needs. Their languages had few overlapping concepts for conflict resolution or tactical planning. The Cathar could not comprehend the human willingness to charge into danger. Their entire cultural history taught avoidance of conflict and de-escalation through understanding. They watched marine boarding preparations with something between horror and fascination. The concept of deliberately entering a hostile environment armed with projectile weapons seemed fundamentally irrational to beings who used sonic harmonizers to calm aggressive wildlife. Human soldiers equally failed to understand Cathar defensive methods. The idea of facing a consuming swarm with coordinated singing felt like bringing a musical instrument to an artillery duel. They watched demonstrations of harmonic shields that could deflect small meteoroids, but collapsed against focused energy weapons. The cultural gap between their approaches to protection seemed almost impossible to bridge. This first contact became a constant negotiation between two radically different worldviews. Human medics had to explain triage procedures to healers who believed all life deserved equal preservation effort. Cathar coordinators had to describe their emotional network to tacticians who valued objective data over subjective feeling. Every operational detail required translation not just of language, but of fundamental assumptions about reality. Despite these differences, a mutual respect began to form. The humans recognized the courage required to maintain harmony while facing extinction. The Cathar saw the discipline behind human military precision and the compassion driving their rescue mission. They found common ground in their shared determination to protect innocent lives, however differently they might approach that goal. The collaboration began with simple, practical steps. Human engineers helped reinforce Cathar evacuation ships with additional plating. Cathar harmonizers worked to create communication frequencies that could penetrate scar-jamming signals. Both species learned to appreciate the other's strengths while acknowledging their limitations. This uneasy alliance would soon face its first real test against the advancing enemy forces. The tactical briefing room displayed the cold mathematics of their situation. Sensor data showed over 300 scar vessels moving through the system with methodical precision. The human fleet numbered 37 ships, most designed for patrol and reconnaissance rather than sustained combat. This wasn't just a numerical disadvantage, but an existential mismatch. Conventional fleet doctrine assumed relatively equal forces or defensible positions. Here they faced overwhelming numbers with no strategic advantages. The SCAR's adaptation rate rendered standard military planning useless. Intelligence indicated they analyzed and countered new tactics within hours of first encounter. Every weapon system, every defensive maneuver would have limited effectiveness before becoming predictable. Fleet doctrine relied on established patterns of engagement that the enemy would quickly master and neutralize. Traditional battle plans would lead to certain destruction. Dr. Santos from Tactical Analysis identified a critical weakness in the enemy's perfection. The SCAR followed extremely predictable patterns because their collective consciousness valued efficiency above all else. Their movements showed mathematical precision in formation and attack vectors. This consistency created opportunities for disruption through illogical or unpredictable actions. Human creativity might prove their greatest weapon against a perfectly logical adversary. The battle plan shifted from direct engagement to asymmetric warfare. They would use the asteroid belts and ruined Cathar platforms as cover for hit-and-run attacks. The shattered remains of consumed worlds became a tactical labyrinth where smaller forces could operate effectively. Every drifting rock and broken structure offered potential concealment or ambush positions. This environment favored mobility and surprise over brute force. Human ships would fight a war of attrition against an endless swarm. The strategy involved striking vulnerable targets, then disappearing into the debris fields. They would target supply lines and isolated formations rather than engaging main battle groups. The goal was to disrupt enemy operations rather than achieve decisive victories. Each engagement would test their ability to innovate faster than the enemy could adapt. Morrison studied the faces around the briefing table. His officers showed the grim determination of professionals facing impossible odds. The Cathar representatives displayed a mixture of fear and resolve that spoke to their cultural transformation. He knew most of the people in this room would not survive the coming conflict. The casualty projections showed catastrophic losses even under optimal conditions. The strategic reality accepted that doctrine had already failed. Previous civilizations had tried conventional defense and been consumed. Their only chance lay in doing what no logical enemy would expect. They would embrace risk and unpredictability as tactical advantages. The plan was daring because it rejected everything military science taught about engaging superior forces. They would use the system's natural features as force multipliers. Asteroid fields provided cover for ambush tactics. Gas giant atmospheres could mask energy signatures and disrupt enemy sensors. Destroyed catheter platforms offered structural cover and pre-existing infrastructure. Every environmental factor became a potential weapon or shield in their asymmetric campaign. The human crews began modifying their ships for guerrilla operations. They installed additional sensor dampeners and short-range thrusters for quick maneuvering in tight spaces. Weapon systems were recalibrated for rapid engagement and disengagement, rather than sustained firefights. The entire fleet prepared to fight like predators in the shadows, rather than warriors on a battlefield. Morrison finalized the deployment orders knowing they were committing to a strategy with no historical precedent. They were betting everything on human unpredictability against alien perfection. The enemy would expect logical responses to their attacks. They would receive chaos and improvisation instead. The battle would test whether creativity could overcome overwhelming force when doctrine had already failed. The Scar forces entered the system like a swarm of locusts darkening a summer sky. Their approach showed no formation or tactical grouping, just relentless forward motion. The main hive vessel moved toward the gas giant's moons, extending massive processing tendrils that began breaking apart lunar rock for fuel conversion. The scale of their operation was staggering, an entire moon being systematically dismantled within hours. Human ships waited in the shadow of asteroid clusters, running silent with minimal energy signatures. Their attack began with precision strikes against isolated Scar vessels that strayed from the main group. Hit-and-run tactics using the debris fields for cover created confusion among the enemy ranks. The Scar responded with their usual efficiency, adapting to weapons fire and countering with targeted responses. But their adaptations assumed logical military behavior, not the chaotic improvisation humans employed. A Marine boarding team led by Sergeant Rodriguez approached a medium-sized bioship that had separated from the main swarm. Their insertion craft used asteroid cover to approach undetected. The breaching charge tore through the organic hull with a contained explosion that sealed the opening behind them. They entered an environment unlike any ship interior they had encountered before. The walls pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that shifted in response to their presence. The air carried a thick organic scent that reminded them of exposed soil and decaying vegetation. The interior structure resembled a living organism more than a constructed vessel. Passageways contorted and shifted around them, attempting to isolate the intruders. They fought their way toward what scans indicated was a central nerve cluster. The resistance they faced wasn't from soldiers but from the ship itself. Biological defense systems that attacked with acidic secretions and constricting membranes. Their weapons fire caused the walls to bleed dark fluid that hardened into protective barriers. They reached the nerve center after sustaining multiple casualties. The chamber pulsed with intense light patterns that synchronized across the entire ship. Dr. Santos's analysis suggested this was the local coordination node for this vessel segment. Rodriguez placed explosive charges at the convergence points where neural tissues gathered most densely. The detonation created a feedback pulse that raced through the biological network. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The Scar drones on the ship began moving erratically, losing their coordinated patterns. Some attacked each other while others simply drifted aimlessly. The single consciousness that had guided them was fractured into disconnected biological impulses. Where there had been perfect coordination, there was now only animalistic chaos. The Marines fought their way back to the extraction point against disorganized resistance that lacked strategic direction. This successful breach revealed the enemy's critical vulnerability. Their perfection relied on uninterrupted connection to the collective consciousness. Severing that connection turned their efficiently coordinated forces into confused biological entities. The strategy shifted from destroying ships to disrupting their neural networks. This approach required precision strikes rather than overwhelming force, playing to human strengths in surgical operations. The battle data showed that while the Scar could adapt to conventional weapons, they struggled against attacks targeting their command structure. Their biological nature made them vulnerable to disruptions that mechanical systems might withstand. This discovery changed the entire tactical approach to the conflict. Instead of facing an unstoppable force, they were fighting a system with identifiable weaknesses. The Marines had found the crack in the enemy's armor, and now they would exploit it. The successful boarding operation revealed a critical tactical opportunity. The breach teams had proven that targeting the Scar's neural networks created more disruption than conventional attacks. This discovery led to a new cooperative strategy that leveraged both species' strengths. Human Marines would continue leading the dangerous boarding actions, while Cathar forces provided specialized support. Sergeant Major Rodriguez took command of the expanded boarding operations. His teams developed procedures for rapid insertion and neural disruption. They learned to identify critical nerve clusters and bioreactor locations within the organic ships. Each breach followed a precise sequence of explosive entry, target identification, and timed withdrawal. The Cathar provided detailed scans of biological weak points that human sensors had missed. The Cathar designed their first military craft specifically for these operations. Stealth shuttles incorporated harmonic dampeners that masked their approach from Scar sensors. These vessels carried teams that specialized in biological disruption rather than direct combat. They used resonant frequencies to interfere with life support systems and neural pathways. This approach allowed them to contribute without violating their cultural aversion to violence. Rodriguez led the most dangerous pushes into nerve centers. His teams faced constant adaptation from the biological defenses. Passageways reconfigured to trap them, and defensive secretions ate through armor plating. They learned to move quickly and unpredictably, exploiting the brief window before the collective consciousness could coordinate a response. Each successful disruption created cascading failures throughout the vessel. The Cathar developed combat techniques that respected their cultural values. They used defensive harmonies to create protective fields around Marine teams during extractions. Their sonic weapons focused on disorientation and system disruption rather than physical destruction. They learned to fight in ways that preserved their identity while accepting necessary adaptation. Their songs now carried rhythms of determination alongside their traditional harmonies. This collaboration created a new balance on the battlefield. Human aggression combined with Cathar precision produced results neither could achieve alone. The Marines provided the violent entry and combat endurance, while the Cathar offered biological expertise and system disruption. Their coordinated attacks showed the Scar that their predictable responses had met an unpredictable opponent. The tactical advantage shifted through coordinated disruption rather than overwhelming force. Scar vessels began showing hesitation in their movements as the neural network experienced repeated interruptions. The perfect coordination that had made them unstoppable now became their vulnerability. Each successful operation provided more data on how to fracture their collective consciousness. Valara watched her people discover a form of courage that didn't require abandoning their core values. They learned to defend their culture without becoming what they fought against. The younger Cathar worked alongside Marine teams, their forehands learning to handle emergency seals and medical equipment. They maintained their harmonic traditions while adopting practical survival skills. The cultural clash resolved into a brutal but effective partnership. Human efficiency combined with Cathar empathy created a fighting force unlike any the galaxy had seen. They fought with the precision of military professionals and the purpose of cultural preservation. Each species compensated for the other's limitations while enhancing their strengths. This new alliance proved that Deathworlder resilience and pacifist ingenuity could create unexpected advantages. The Scar's perfect collective mind struggled against opponents who blended violent entry with harmonic disruption. They faced enemies who could breach their defenses physically while attacking their consciousness through resonant frequencies. The battle became a symphony of coordinated violence and precise harmony, each note striking against the enemy's biological foundation. Dr. Santos studied the patterns of disruption created by previous boarding actions. Her analysis showed consistent neural feedback across multiple Scar vessels when specific nerve clusters were damaged. She noted how the collective consciousness attempted to reroute around damaged sections, creating temporary fragmentation before reorganization. This temporary fragmentation became the focus of her research. She determined that a synchronized resonance attack could amplify this effect beyond the enemy's ability to compensate. She designed a device that targeted the fundamental nature of the collective consciousness. It didn't use explosive force or energy weapons. Instead, it emitted a complex resonance pattern that mimicked massive neural trauma across multiple frequencies. The weapon wouldn't destroy ships physically, but would overload the single mind that controlled them. Her calculations predicted it would force the consciousness to fracture into individual components for self-preservation. The device required both human and cathar technology to function. Human systems provided the power generation and targeting mechanisms. Cathar harmonic technology created the precise resonance frequencies needed for neural disruption. The final design represented a perfect fusion of their technological approaches. It looked nothing like a conventional weapon, resembling instead a complex array of crystal resonators and energy projectors. A specially modified stealth ship carried the device into the battle zone. The vessel incorporated cathar harmonic dampeners and human sensor scattering technology. It moved through the debris fields undetected, approaching the main scar formation where hundreds of ships moved in perfect synchronization. The attack required precise positioning at the center of their neural network density. The device activated with a silent pulse that spread through space. There was no explosion, no visible energy discharge. The effect appeared first on sensor readings as massive neural activity spikes across the entire scar fleet. Then the enemy ships began behaving erratically. Their coordinated movements broke into chaotic individual patterns. The single consciousness that had directed them shattered into thousands of separate biological entities. The change was immediate and total. Where there had been perfect formation flying, there was now random drifting and collisions. Some ships accelerated uncontrollably while others shut down completely. The neural network that had made them so effective became their undoing. Without centralized control, each biological component reverted to basic instinctual behavior. They became a swarm of disconnected entities rather than a coordinated force. The battlefield transformation was instantaneous. The overwhelming threat became a manageable cleanup operation. Human and cathar ships moved through the disorganized masses, targeting now helpless vessels with precise strikes. The SCAR's adaptation capability meant nothing without centralized coordination. They couldn't respond to attacks or organize defensive maneuvers. Each ship fought alone against coordinated opponents. The weapon's success demonstrated the power of cross-species collaboration. Neither civilization could have developed this solution alone. Human aggression provided the initial breach tactics that revealed the weakness. Cathar harmonic technology created the precise frequencies needed for neural disruption. Their combined approach defeated an enemy that had overcome every previous conventional defense. This breakthrough changed the nature of the conflict entirely. The SCAR went from being an unstopped consuming force to a vulnerable biological collective. Their greatest strength, perfect coordination, became their critical weakness when properly targeted. The Alliance now had a tool that could neutralize their advantage without requiring overwhelming force. The cleanup operation proceeded with methodical efficiency. Isolated SCAR ships offered little resistance against coordinated attacks. Their biological systems couldn't adapt quickly enough without central direction. Each destroyed vessel represented another step toward securing the system. The weapon had turned certain defeat into potential victory through understanding rather than brute force. The device represented more than just a tactical advantage. It symbolized what two different civilizations could achieve when they combined their unique perspectives. Human practicality and cathar harmony created a solution that respected both their approaches to problem solving. They had found a way to fight that didn't require abandoning their core values while still achieving military objectives. Ambassador. Zafar's diplomatic vessel arrived in the cathar system as the last SCAR ships were being cleared. His appearance marked a significant shift in galactic engagement. The Altarian Republic had observed the conflict from a distance like most spacefaring civilizations. They had monitored the SCAR's advance across multiple sectors, recording the silent destruction of 12 distinct species. Their assessment concluded that resistance was strategically unwise against such overwhelming force. Zafar admitted that the wider galactic community had been watching through long-range sensors and intelligence networks. Many governments considered the SCAR an unstoppable natural phenomenon rather than a conventional enemy. Their perfect coordination and adaptation capabilities suggested military response would only accelerate consumption. The common policy involved fortifying borders and preparing evacuation plans rather than mounting defense efforts. The success of the Human-Cathar alliance created shockwaves across diplomatic channels. Where established civilizations saw inevitable extinction, two completely different species had achieved unexpected victory. Their cooperation demonstrated that unconventional approaches could overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. This realization forced a re-evaluation of galactic political relationships and defense strategies. Emergency council meetings convened across multiple systems. Representatives from 15 species established a coalition agreement within hours of the battle's conclusion. The treaty focused on mutual defense against SCAR incursions with provisions for technological sharing and coordinated response protocols. This marked the first multi-species military alliance in recent galactic history, breaking centuries of isolationist policies. The Coalition Council mapped an immediate 3-week campaign to eliminate remaining SCAR forces. Intelligence indicated the neural disruption had crippled, but not destroyed the entire collective. Follow-up operations required precise strikes against scattered biological remnants. The coordinated effort involved ships from 9 different civilizations operating under unified command structures. The weapon that turned the conflict became a model for coalition warfare. Its design combined cathode harmonic technology with human artillery delivery systems. The fusion of resonant frequencies and projectile deployment created a template for future anti-SCAR defenses. Engineering teams from multiple species began working on variations adapted to their specific technological capabilities. The final engagement involved clearing 27 star systems of SCAR remnants. Coalition forces moved with coordinated precision that surprised military analysts. Different species vessels covered each other's tactical weaknesses while amplifying their strengths. The cleanup operation demonstrated how diverse technologies could create more effective military responses than standardized fleets. Galactic political maps were redrawn following the victory. Previous spheres of influence based on isolated defense gave way to cooperative security arrangements. Trade routes reopened between systems that had been separated by SCAR incursions. The balance of power shifted from isolated superpowers to collaborative networks of medium-sized civilizations. The psychological impact across civilized space was profound. Where there had been resignation to inevitable consumption, there was now cautious optimism. Civilizations that had focused entirely on self-preservation began considering mutual protection agreements. The demonstration that cooperation could defeat overwhelming threats changed fundamental assumptions about galactic politics. This new unity remained tentative and carefully managed. Centuries of isolationist policies couldn't be overturned quickly, but the foundation had been established for a different approach to galactic security. The coalition standing watch against future threats represented a fundamental shift from fear to coordinated preparedness. The galaxy had learned that some dangers required collective response rather than isolated defense. Valara stood amid the reconstruction efforts, her 4 hands directing crews with the same fluid grace she once used to coordinate harmonies. She had become a war leader who never raised her voice, whose commands carried the melodic precision of her cultural heritage. The crystal cities rose again from the gas giant's atmosphere, their structures now incorporating human engineering principles without sacrificing aesthetic beauty. The new platforms featured reinforced crystalline lattices interwoven with titanium supports, creating defenses that could withstand impacts their predecessors would have shattered against. Captain Morrison moved between construction sites and tactical meetings, his presence a constant reminder of the alliance that had saved them. He helped translate human defensive concepts into terms the Cathar could implement within their cultural framework. His recommendations focused on protection rather than aggression, aligning with their core values while providing practical security. He became the living bridge between military necessity and cultural preservation, respected by both species for his understanding of their differing perspectives. The rebuilt cities incorporated shared defense networks that blended technologies. Harmonic projectors mounted on human-designed turrets could create protective fields while delivering calibrated energy bursts. Early warning systems used both Cathar emotional resonance sensors and human radar technology. The integration created a layered defense that respected both approaches to protection. Each platform became a testament to what two civilizations could achieve through mutual understanding, rather than forced assimilation. Younger Cathar began training alongside Marine detachments left as defensive garrisons. They learned emergency response procedures and basic combat medicine, without abandoning their harmonic traditions. Human soldiers in turn studied Cathar music theory and emotional resonance techniques. The cultural exchange created a new generation, comfortable with both approaches to crisis management. They developed hybrid techniques that used harmonic frequencies to enhance coordination during emergencies. The joint archive established in the central city contained complete records of the conflict. Battle data, scar biological samples, and technical specifications of the neural disruption weapon became available to all coalition members. Research teams from multiple species studied the materials, seeking to understand both the threat and the solution. This repository represented the first truly shared galactic knowledge base for defense against existential threats. The scar were not completely destroyed but fundamentally changed. The neural disruption had fractured their collective consciousness into isolated biological clusters. These remnants posed no organized threat, but served as a permanent reminder of what unchecked consumption could unleash. Coalition patrols monitored their movements, ready to respond if reorganization patterns emerged. The surviving biological matter became subject to ongoing study and containment protocols. The coalition maintained vigilance through shared responsibility. Patrol rotations involved ships from multiple species operating under unified command. Joint training exercises practiced response procedures for potential scar reemergence. The defense network extended across previously isolated sectors, creating a web of mutual protection that crossed cultural boundaries. This cooperation represented a fundamental shift from isolated survival to collective security. The rebuilding process healed more than physical damage. It created bonds between species that had previously existed in isolation. Human engineers worked alongside Cathar architects to create structures that honored both their traditions. Marine medics trained Cathar healers in emergency trauma care, while learning their techniques for emotional rehabilitation. The exchange of knowledge and skills built foundations stronger than any treaty could establish. The new normal involved constant readiness without perpetual fear. Defense systems remained active but didn't dominate daily life. The Cathar continued their cultural practices with renewed appreciation for their preservation. Their emotional light networks now pulsed with colors of determination and resilience, alongside their traditional harmonies. The humans stationed among them found unexpected peace in the rhythm of a civilization that had nearly been lost but now stood stronger than before. The system became a symbol of what cooperation could achieve against overwhelming odds. Other civilizations sent delegations to study the integrated defense systems and cultural exchange programs. The model of human Cathar collaboration offered templates for interspecies cooperation across the galaxy. What began as a desperate rescue mission had become a foundation for broader galactic community. The Cathar home system now operated under joint patrol rotations. Coalition vessels from 9 species moved in coordinated patterns through the cleared space lanes. Their crystal platforms glowed with steady light patterns that spoke of regained security. The emotional resonance network showed colors of determination rather than fear, courage instead of desperation. This visual transformation reflected their psychological recovery from near extinction. The alliance created a new model for interstellar relations. Different civilizations found ways to combine their strengths without sacrificing their identities. Human military efficiency worked alongside Cathar harmonic technology, each enhancing the other's capabilities. The cooperation extended beyond defense into cultural exchange and scientific collaboration. This represented a fundamental shift from isolated development to shared progress. Jake Morrison and Valara stood together on an observation platform overlooking the rebuilt cities. Their partnership had become symbolic of the larger alliance. They had learned to communicate across cultural divides that once seemed impassable. His direct commands and her harmonic guidance created a balance that served both their peoples. They now planned security operations with mutual understanding of each other's capabilities and limitations. The galaxy-wide response to the Scar threat established new precedents for collective action. Where fear and isolation had once dominated interstellar politics, cooperation and mutual defense now took priority. The coalition's success demonstrated that diverse civilizations could unite against common threats. This didn't eliminate all conflicts or differences, but it created frameworks for resolving them through dialogue rather than avoidance. The human response to the Cathar plea had consequences beyond military victory. It showed that Deathworlder capabilities could protect as well as destroy. Humanity's willingness to risk itself for strangers redefined their galactic reputation. They became known as defenders rather than merely survivors, a species that would stand with others against overwhelming threats. This perception shift opened diplomatic channels that had previously remained closed. The alliance proved that defensive capability didn't require abandoning cultural values. The Cathar maintained their harmonic traditions while developing practical security measures. Their cities still sang at dawn. Their emotional light still reflected collective moods. The human presence added protective layers without overwhelming their way of life. This balance between preservation and protection became a model for other civilizations facing threats. The shared defense network extended across multiple star systems. Early warning sensors linked coalition members in real-time response protocols. Joint training exercises practiced coordinated reactions to potential threats. This web of mutual protection created security through diversity rather than uniformity. Different species' capabilities covered each other's vulnerabilities, creating stronger overall defense. The psychological impact resonated across civilized space. Civilizations that had focused on isolation now considered cooperation. The demonstration that overwhelming threats could be overcome changed fundamental assumptions about survival. This didn't eliminate all caution or suspicion, but it provided working examples of successful collaboration. The galaxy became slightly less dangerous through shared vigilance. The message sent across 17 languages had found its answer. The response came not just in ships and weapons, but in lasting commitment. The plea for help received more than temporary assistance. It sparked enduring partnership. This outcome demonstrated that vulnerability could be met with strength without exploitation. The protection of beauty became a shared responsibility rather than a solitary struggle. The new galactic order remained cautiously optimistic rather than naively idealistic. Threats still existed and conflicts still arose between species, but the foundation had been established for addressing challenges through cooperation rather than isolation. The alliance stood as proof that different evolutionary paths could converge toward common protection. Their watch continued, but now with allies rather than alone. Valara's transmission became known across coalition space as the Harmony Plea. It entered galactic historical records as a perfect example of honest vulnerability. The recording showed a coordinator admitting total defensive failure while maintaining cultural integrity. This combination of weakness and strength resonated across species boundaries. The message proved that a cry for help could transcend light years and cultural differences. It demonstrated that admitting need could be more powerful than projecting strength. Earth's response defined humanity's galactic identity for generations. The decision to send ships into certain danger for strangers showed our core values. It demonstrated that Deathworlder resilience could protect rather than just destroy. Our willingness to risk everything for beings who offered nothing in return became our diplomatic signature. This action spoke louder than any first contact protocol or trade agreement. It showed that humanity would stand with the vulnerable against overwhelming threats. The alliance proved that radically different civilizations could become effective partners. The Cathar maintained their harmonic traditions while learning practical defense. Humans provided security without demanding cultural change. Their cooperation created something neither could achieve alone. This model of mutual respect became the foundation for the broader coalition. It showed that diversity could be a tactical advantage rather than a barrier. The story served as both warning and inspiration across the galaxy. It showed that consumption-based expansion would face organized resistance. It also demonstrated that even pacifist civilizations could find ways to defend themselves. The Scar Dominion became a reminder that some threats require collective response. Their defeat proved that perfect coordination could be overcome through creativity and cooperation. The resulting peace remained cautious but durable. Coalition members maintained defensive preparations while pursuing cultural exchange. The balance between security and openness became the new standard for interstellar relations. This careful equilibrium was built on proven courage rather than optimistic theory. It withstood tests because its founders had faced extinction together. The final lesson transcended military strategy or political calculation. It showed that sometimes the most powerful action is asking for help. Valara's admission of weakness became her species' greatest strength. Her honest assessment of their situation triggered a chain of events that saved them. This demonstrated that vulnerability requires more courage than defiance. Humanity's response completed the lesson. We showed that sometimes the only answer is to be stupidly, bravely human, to charge into danger because it's the right thing to do, to help strangers because they need help, to risk everything for beauty and peace. This impulse defined our species more than any technological achievement or military victory. The legacy continues in every coalition patrol and shared research initiative. Younger generations study the harmony plea in diplomatic academies. Military strategists analyze the neural disruption tactics. Cultural historians examine the integration of human and Cathar technologies. Each aspect offers lessons about cooperation against overwhelming odds. The plea and its response created a template for galactic relations. It showed that honesty and courage can bridge evolutionary differences. It proved that preservation requires both harmony and strength. The alliance stands as permanent proof that diverse species can protect each other. Their watch continues, but now as partners rather than strangers. The story's power lies in its simplicity. A cry for help answered by a reckless act of courage. No complex negotiations or calculated benefits. Just beings helping other beings because it needed doing. This fundamental truth resonates across species and star systems. It reminds us that sometimes the galaxy makes sense in the simplest terms. Someone asks for help. Someone else answers. Everything changes because of that basic exchange. The Cathar's song was almost silenced by the consuming darkness. Their harmony nearly faded into the void. But a desperate plea sent across 17 languages found its answer in human courage. That brave response ensured their melody would continue. Their light would keep glowing above the gas giants. Remember this when you look at the stars. In a vast and often dark cosmos, the choice to help a stranger can redefine the future for entire civilizations. The story ends here, but the Alliance stands watch. Proof that we are not alone and we are stronger together.